And welcome back to African Perspective as we focus on the upcoming double Troika that will take place to find a solution to the impasse as well as the tensions that are playing out in the northern parts of Mozambique in Cabo Delgado. Let me just quickly then bring in this particular conversation, and that is around an issue that you just mentioned a bit earlier on, Piers, and that is in May last year, there was a Troika meeting that took place, and in the communique they said, the extraordinary organ, a Troika summit plus Mozambique, was briefed by His Excellency President Nyusi on the situation in Mozambique and welcomed the decision by the government of the Republic of Mozambique to bring to the attention of SADC the security situation in the country. Then what happened?
Well, the communique goes on to ask member states to provide whatever assistance they can to confront the insurgency. So what happened next is that Mozambique really ploughed ahead with a number of bilateral discussions with member states in the region. And at the same time, an effort was underway by SADC to work with the substructures of the Organ for Politics, Defence and Security to work on this regional plan. And this is where there was a great deal of frustration. But as I said, meanwhile, there were bilateral discussions taking place between Mozambique and Tanzania on border security, on police cooperation, a resuscitation, for example, of a Malawian border security and intelligence sharing cooperation, and efforts to get Zimbabwe involved by the Mozambicans. And there has been some support from Zimbabwe. There's been a small training component going on. 2 companies of soldiers have been trained by the Zimbabweans. But this really is nibbling at the edges, dealing with the symptoms and not the causes of the problems inside the security services themselves and the challenge that they're facing. So, and this has been the preferred approach by Maputo, is to, again, under the rubric of this sovereignty comfort blanket, to be able to see what it can get from other countries. And so it presents shopping lists and requests, but it doesn't present those within the context of a coordinated national security strategy that is linked to a broader human security and development strategy, which is absolutely essential if you're going to deal with the root causes of this insurgency. So
with this particular meeting, when there's another communique that's sent out, what is it that you'd like to see in that communique?
Well, ideally one would like to see some firm commitments and a timeline to which there would be some movement towards action on the ground. But frankly, as I was saying earlier, there's been no real preparation along these lines. So the expectation is there's going to be some firm language in this. But is it really going to be for more than platitudes?
Is it going to be one of those again where SADC says that we condemn the attacks?
Well, that will happen. There's no doubt. I mean, that language is standard. But, we've got to keep our eye out for 1 or 2 lines which actually give some firm commitments to actual action on the ground that is going to move towards some kind of strategic plan. And frankly, I don't see that happening in this context. And, there may be something small that Mozambique can open the door to provide support, or can open the door for support to be provided by the region, and that would be a progress, relative progress in the current context. But it's not clear. I think President Nyusi has put himself in an impossible position, much of which he's created himself.
Okay, and Dewa, then what sort of support do you see the fellow member states being able to provide the Mozambican government?
Well, we've heard from.
Okay, let me just quickly have Dewa answer that question, and then I'll come back to you, Piers.
Okay, the first important point is for the Mozambican government to accept and reach out to SADC. So tomorrow they must actually say they need help in which specific areas, and then on the basis of that, SADC can then have a strategy and roadmap to address the security, humanitarian, and protection needs of the people in Cabo Delgado. But I think a big achievement will be for Mozambique to formally acknowledge the crisis and reach out and say it is welcoming support from SADC, and then a roadmap that is clear about which steps need to be taken immediately to address the security concerns in Cabo Delgado province.
Okay, and Piers?
Well, I think also connected to that, there needs to be a connection with other areas of support. The European Union, for example, has made some decisions in recent days that it will extend its support. And previously, it has said that it is interested in seeing how it can do that with SADC. So SADC itself needs to do some running there on that front in terms of its engagement with other parties that are coming to the table to support there. Actual areas of support where there might be some, military support. We see there is some experience from some of the region's countries' special forces, for example, intelligence sharing and cooperation and analysis. Absolutely critical. You cannot put a strategy together unless you know what you're dealing with. And quite frankly, what we've seen so far is a massive intelligence deficit in this situation. This attack in Palma that we've seen, they did not see it coming. In fact, we sort of, and this is not just the Mozambican government, it was the oil companies as well that have an army of analysts up there who simply did not see this coming. So, a lot more work needs to happen on that front, a lot more cooperation. And also, really, as I was saying earlier, some kind of coastal security strategy needs to be involved in this as well, because the coast is really not properly defended and people are vulnerable in that area, and it remains a major smuggling route for both drugs and possibly also for weapons. And even further down the line, we may see more and more personnel being brought in.
Yeah. And just quickly, Dewa, what do you then make of a commitment that has been made from Portugal, for instance, that they would be willing to provide training? They said that they'll be sending down about 60 people, but only after they've done with the conversations with the Mozambican government. What do you make of that type of assistance? And also at the same time, you have the US military force, and we're told that they are there, but also with the intention of just training.
Well, I think it doesn't go far enough. Just training does not address the limitations of the Mozambican government's capacity, and there is no coordination. This is why there is need to link and coordinate between what SADC and the African Union can provide and, additional support from Portugal, from the US, from the UK and the EU, because training alone is insufficient if you're looking at the problems on the ground, including human rights abuses for which the Mozambican army has been implicated, including massive corruption that is feeding into the incapacity and inability to respond adequately. So there is need for wider consultations, and the Mozambican authorities are not forthcoming in terms of saying precisely what the problem is on the ground and what kind of assistance would be sufficient to address the challenge of the militants.
Like, for instance, right now, I'm still not clear why there is that reluctance to get assistance from various SADC member states. But here's the other question, though: what about the private companies themselves, like the Totals that are operating in the region and exploring in the region? What duty do they have to safeguard the area? Because I remember the Mozambican government announcing and saying that, sure, they've come up with a plan to safeguard the area where Total would be exploring, but not necessarily how Total can assist in that.
Well, yes, corporates have a duty to support because they are investing massively in this area. But of course, the challenge is that they will defer to the Mozambican authorities. We have given them access, and therefore that then means that the extent of their support mechanisms is very limited and narrow in the sense of the areas of their investments. But what we need is a comprehensive plan to secure the entire province and to ensure that the insurgency is brought to an end in order to peacefully guarantee the protection of all civilians. This has not happened, and as Piers has correctly noted, these corporates, including Total, did not see the Palma attack coming. So it's really that what you need is a multi-nation approach that SADC and the AU can provide if the Mozambican authorities are willing to engage at that level.
Piers, do you see that as an option where private companies and entities like Total would have to revisit the strategy? I know that this is a private company looking at exploration. However, though, you have a security situation that they're facing as well.
Well, Total, in terms of its memorandum of understanding with the government for the security of the area, has signed up, in theory at least, to the voluntary principles on human rights and security, which lay out a set of best practices in terms of how it would engage with the community and with communities and with government on security-related and human rights-related concerns. I think there is a wider concern, though, that these are companies that are used to operating in extremely difficult circumstances and in war conditions. Mm-hmm. And their priority will be to ring-fence their operations in order to be able to conduct business, so to speak. And this leads in some areas to what has been coined by some analysts as the Iraqification concern, where you're going to get heavily fortified zones around the LNG sites and security corridors, and a lesser security provisions for other areas provided by the government. Total is subsidizing the government to provide troops into the area around the Fungi Peninsula with a joint task force there. So it is making a contribution. The question is whether that contribution is going to assist the Mozambican government to have that wider angle view that Dewa is talking about providing proper human-based security for the whole of the province.
Yeah, because the issue, though, Piers, about a subsidy is that here we're speaking about money, and we're having a conversation here about corruption as well, and we're not too sure whether all of that money would be flowing towards securing the particular area. So how then do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, unless you have proper checks and balances, and that requires commitments from government, and that's a tall order in with the Mozambican state. We're aware of that. So, let's not kid ourselves. The multinationals are having to navigate an extremely difficult space in this regard, but they also come with this also comes with a certain set of responsibilities that cannot be airbrushed away. And I think it's extremely important that there is more emphasis given to these principles. That some Mozambican civil society organizations are trying to generate a conversation with the oil companies and with government and with civil society to look at how best in the long term they can engage around these issues. And really that's where we're at the moment. And it's really about shining a light on these issues and getting more involved. And I think, this is the only way that we can go forward to have some measure of improved accountability in the situation.
Dewa, is the answer to that improved accountability also a burden that the shareholders of Total should be bearing, and also demanding that Total does its own investigation around the flow of the subsidies that Piers speaks of?
Yes, but what we need to look at also is the responsibility of the Mozambican state as the primary duty bearer to secure the entire territory, and particularly the province of Cabo Delgado. And that when corporates, private companies, entities come in, they are coming in within the framework of what the government is directing and saying. The challenge is that here in Mozambique we have a very weak and indecisive government that has not stepped forward, and that has left a huge void in terms of lack of security, in terms of space for the insurgents to move around and to regroup and to become stronger. So the primary focus, including for the meetings by SADC tomorrow, should be on Mozambique stepping forward and then creating space and then reaching out and directing and monitoring the work of the corporates.
Okay, just in conclusion, and I'm going to start off with you, Dewa. Earlier on, I was looking at the Declaration on the Convention and Prevention and Combating of Terrorism that all member states have signed. This is SADC member states. And looking at point number 5 there, which says, prevent SADC member states from being used as bases or support centers for groups or individuals involved in terrorist activities. With that particular declaration being there, what does this mean in terms of how far the SADC member states can go in the absence of cooperation from the Mozambican government?
Well, that clause 5 of the declaration can be activated to ensure that SADC member states are protected where there is, a terrorist group on the soil of a member state, in this case, Mozambique. But I believe that there will be reluctance to go that route until there is a secured agreement from the part of Mozambique. I think we are getting to a point now where it's becoming clear that there is no other way for the Mozambican authorities to proceed other than to reach out and get the support of SADC, because already they have reached out to Portugal, to the EU and to the US government.
Okay, Piers, just quickly your take on that clause number 5?
Well, I concur with Dewa that there is going to be a reluctance to set a kind of precedent for this kind of intervention. I mean, there's been some talk, particularly from within Zimbabwe, from elements of government and the ruling party there, about the need to invoke Section 6.1 of the Mutual Defence Pact. But let's be clear here, we're in uncharted territory. And SADC needs to look at hard security issues, but it needs to also invest in strategies that relate to combating and preventing violent extremism. And this is a long-term game that they need to be involved in. But they need to also work in a way which does not further alienate some of the elements inside Mozambique. Berating Mozambique is not necessarily going to get the right solution or the right kind of response. And there's a real danger here that if we push too hard on Mozambique, it will stick its head further and further into the sand.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. Piers Pigou there, as well as Dewa Mavhinga. We've come to the end of that conversation, but today Tanzania's new president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, says her government will form a committee of scientific research into COVID-19. This is a departure from the pandemic skeptic policies of her predecessor, John Magufuli, who died last month.